I'm Laura.
And I'm Jill.
Welcome back to today's episode.
Hello everybody, thanks for joining us today.
So Jill, where in the world are we?
In the UK.
Okie dokie. And the title?
Killer on Ward 4.
Oh, okay. Shall we dive in?
Yes, let's dive in. So in March 1991, a little boy called Paul Crampton, who was 5 months old, had been suffering from a minor chest infection and he wasn't getting any better, so his parents took him to the paediatrics ward of Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire for a checkup. So the hospital staff called him a happy wheezer. So although he wasn't too well, he must have still been like a happy wee baby.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So the doctors decided just to keep Paul in overnight as a precaution, and he was admitted to Ward 4. But his parents weren't too worried, as they thought that, their baby was in safe hands. However, a few hours later, Paul's condition had turned serious and his parents were told to come to the hospital. So when they got there was a scene of utter chaos. Like, Paul was in the arms of a nurse, he was grey, he was cold and clammy, and Paul's heart had stopped and the resuscitation team had been called.
Right.
So the consultant paediatrician said that Paul was shut down, pale and sweaty, so he immediately put a intravenous line in and gave him some glucose, and he said that Paul recovered miraculously.
Right.
So he responded well to treatment, and very quickly the chaos stopped, and calm was restored on the ward. But of course, questions remained.
What
happened? So he had recovered from a hypoglycemic attack, which means low sugar, but his parents wanted to know why that had happened in the first place, because he'd just been admitted just with a
chest infection.
just a minor chest infection.
Yeah.
And the hospital staff were in a state of confusion. Like, no one could comprehend what was happening to Paul. Paul's dad said that it seemed to be bigger than that, but he just didn't seem to understand why at the time. He was kind of like, something's not quite right here. So little did he know that Paul's sudden arrest wasn't the only unexpected incident that Ward 4 had seen in recent weeks. In fact, by average standards, Ward 4 was seeing a really bad run of luck when it came to its young patients. It had been over the winter time, so obviously the ward expected to see like an increase in the number of sick children, just with colds and you know what it's like over the winter.
Yeah.
But it just seemed worse than normal that year. So on the 21st of February 1991, 7-week-old Liam Taylor was brought in with a mild chest infection. His condition wasn't life-threatening and he didn't have a bad heart, but within hours of being admitted to Ward 4, he had collapsed with respiratory is that how you say it?
Yes.
Failure, even though the machines that he was hooked up to had failed to go off.
Oh.
But nurse Beverly Allett was with him at the time and she sounded the alarm straight away. He was revived, but his parents said he was lifeless and they stayed with him throughout the night. In the morning he had improved and he opened his eyes and he just seemed much better. So even though they had managed to resuscitate Liam, the staff were worried that he might crash again. So Beverly offered to do the night shift and watch over him. So feeling reassured, Liam's dad went to bed in a parent's room on the ward, and at about midnight, but by 5 a.m. he was woken with the news that Liam had had another respiratory oh God.
Why did you put these words in?
Because that's what it's called, it's medical. Respiratory collapse. I'm just gonna move on.
Yeah, I think so.
So Liam had
Are you just not?
Oh my God! And it's such a serious thing, and I'm not laughing. You know what I mean? I just feel so inappropriate by laughing, but it's just I'm laughing at myself.
Yeah, because you can't pronounce a word.
Yeah, sorry. So.
Calm.
Yeah, Liam had
Deteriorated.
Yeah.
That's still in the blanks for you.
Well, you could have done that with the respiratory thing.
I don't know if I can say it, so I didn't want to try.
Right, okay, right. But seriousness. So Liam had deteriorated about 4 a.m. and again the monitors had failed, but Beverly was with him and she sounded the alarm again. A specialist team arrived, but Liam's heart had begun to give out. It took over an hour to revive him, and because he had been deprived of oxygen for so long, he suffered brain damage and was dependent on the life support machine.
Yeah.
So the parents made the decision to remove him from the life support because he was brain damaged, so it wasn't going to be, there wasn't going to be a good outcome.
No.
It was only the machines that were keeping him alive, so they're like, just, we're going to have to let him go. So he died in his dad's arms. I mean, he was only 7 weeks. I mean, that's horrendous.
I can't even imagine. That's horrible.
I know. So Liam's cause of death was stated as a heart attack, but the doctors were suspicious of that diagnosis because he'd had no heart problems before. They also didn't understand why the machines didn't go off. So Dr. Charith Nanayakara, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, wrote to the medical examiner and asked for an autopsy to be done, but this request was ignored.
Okay.
So 2 weeks after that, on the 5th of March 1991, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, who had cerebral palsy, sorry, I'm rubbish at normal words, never mind medical stuff. He was admitted after having fits at school. So Mary Reed, one of the nurses, she asked her colleague Beverly Allett to admit Timothy and watch over him while she was doing the drug round. So Mary hadn't even finished the round before Beverly shouted that there was a problem. So Timothy had turned blue and was barely breathing. An emergency team attempted resuscitation, but unfortunately he died. And his cause of death was stated as epilepsy.
Jeez.
So 3 days after that, the 8th of March 1991, Kaylee Desmond, who was 15 months old, was admitted to the ward for a chest infection. She suffered 2 unexplained respiratory arrests. The first was unexpected because, she came in with a chest infection. And the staff were surprised it happened, but the second time they were just bewildered because they're like, well, one time was what's going on? Yeah. And they just couldn't explain why it happened again. So Kaylee was transferred to the larger Nottingham General Hospital, where miraculously she quickly recovered. So the staff at that hospital noticed a puncture mark under her arm and an air bubble underneath it, but they just assumed that it was the result of an accidental injection, so they didn't investigate it. I'm like, what do you mean an accidental injection?
I was just going to say, how do you get an accidental injection?
Yeah, I mean, and if somebody's given injections by accident, shouldn't that be investigated?
Why does that accident happen?
Yeah, so
because obviously it's it's a medical thing. Whatever they're injecting could be lethal. So
weird, isn't it?
And I know human errors can be made, but you should still at least follow up and investigate very why, so that you can prevent it happening again.
Well, they didn't investigate it. So, with 4 sudden and mostly unexplained incidents happening in such a short space of time, the staff on Ward 4 were growing unsettled. So little Paul Crampton, the one I spoke about to start off with, he seemed to be on the mend, but the nurse on duty, Beverly Allett, went to take down the drip, and once again Paul went blue, and the resuscitation team were called to restart his heart. They were successful, and for the next 3 days he was happy and content, and the doctors decided that it was safe for him to be released, and preparations for him to be able to do this began. So his dad, David, went to the hospital canteen to go and get some lunch, but when he came back, Paul was having another hypoglycemic attack. So with this third unexplained incident, the doctors were at a loss as to what was going on, and put him on another glucose drip. So Dr. Nanayakara took blood from Paul before he was rushed to the Queen's Medical Centre, which is a bigger hospital in Nottingham. And there must be a couple of hospitals in Nottingham, 20 miles away. And once he was there, he quickly recovered.
And he was fine.
So a concerned nurse, Beverly Allett,
this woman's name's coming up an awful lot.
Yes, there's a reason for that. I'm sure you're probably guessing why. She took it upon herself to accompany Paul and his mum in the ambulance. So on the surface, the inexperienced nurse had a really traumatic beginning to her career because she'd not long started there. But to everyone's relief, she had remained cool, calm and collected throughout. She was doing really well. But her colleagues felt sorry for her because she had been present at several of the attacks. However, the truth behind her composure was far more sinister, as you may have guessed. So here's what we know about Beverly. So Beverly Gale Allett was born on the 4th of October 1968, and she lived in a place called Corby Glen, which is near the town of Grantham in Lincolnshire. Her dad was Richard, he worked on an off licence, and her mum Lillian was a school cleaner. They had 2 other daughters and a son, and Beverly was the second oldest. And from a very young age, she was an attention seeker.
Okay.
So Catherine Ramsland, who is a professor of forensic psychology, said later about her, quote, "She seemed to be a pudgy..."
Pudgy?
Yes. Sorry. I'm laughing because pudgy means a little bit overweight, you know, a bit...
I thought it was podgy.
Pudgy, no, it's pudgy or podgy. You can...
Oh, well, I've not heard pudgy. I've heard podgy.
Yeah, I've heard podgy and pudgy, so... I don't know, as I said, I don't know if this is a worldwide thing, but for anybody who doesn't know, it just means a bit overweight, you know, a bit chubby.
Yeah.
Which probably isn't the nicest thing to say about somebody.
No.
But yeah, she called her a pudgy kind of girl who wasn't particularly beautiful or striking or talented or gifted in ways that other people used to get attention. So she found that having a hurt arm or a cut or a bandage or a broken arm or something like that got attention, end quote. So she did grow up just like anyone else, seemed like a normal childhood. It was, it was unremarkable. Nothing interesting happened. Except that she maybe just seemed to hurt herself a bit more often than the other kids. You know, she maybe needed to go to hospital now and again if she hurt herself or she just wouldn't be feeling very well. So at the end of primary school, she failed her 11 plus exam. So I had to Google it because in Scotland we don't have the 11 plus
I was
exams.
going to say, I don't recall any exams in primary school.
No, we did. Well, when we lived in England, because I did a few years in primary school in England and I did exams there.
Oh, did you?
In primary school, yeah. But then when we moved here, I didn't have exams in primary school.
Until secondary school.
But in England, and I asked Mum, and Mum, she did her 11 plus exams.
Right.
So anyway, obviously I Googled it because I thought maybe it's just an English thing. So Wikipedia says that the 11 plus is a standardised examination administered to some students in England and Northern Ireland in their last year of primary education, which governs admission to grammar schools and other secondary schools which use academic selection. So there is certain schools that you have to pass exams to get into.
Right, okay.
Which we don't have that here. We're just like, you just go to the school that's nearest to you, don't you?
Oh, yeah, pretty much. But then I do hear, like, as an example in the celebrity world, that, like their kids go off to certain schools, so maybe they're like, I don't know.
Well, I would have just assumed if they were celebrities, they were private schools.
Well, maybe it's just they're private schools that you have to have exams to get into. Maybe you don't just.
No, because her mum never went to private school and she did her 11 plus exams. So it's just certain secondary schools use academic selection.
Right. Okay.
So you have to do exams to get in. So anyway, Beverly, so she failed her 11 plus. So she didn't get to go to the secondary school that she wanted to go to. She wanted to go to Kesteven and Grantham Girls' School, but she ended up having to attend just like the local secondary school, Charles Reid Secondary Modern School, which is obviously co-ed. I don't know why she wanted to go to an all-girls school. Most kids are like, no, I want boys.
Yeah, maybe she was bothered.
So she seemed to have bad luck wherever she went though, because she always had some injury. So she would always have a bandage or a plaster, like dressings over wounds, but she wouldn't let anyone examine her.
Is that because they weren't real?
Probably. So over the years, she would complain about gallbladder pain, appendicitis, back pain, headaches, urinary infections, anything that would get her a bit of attention and sympathy. Somehow, she even managed to get a perfectly healthy appendix removed, which was slow to heal because she kept picking at the scar.
Oh, come on.
Oh, Laura doesn't like things like that. If you talk about picking at scars and squeezing things.
Yeah, let's move on quickly, thank you.
She doesn't like it.
You make me squish.
Sorry, yeah, that's so. I actually forgot that would make you squeamish.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll move on from that.
Yeah, please do.
But yeah, she stopped it from healing as well as it should have. So she was definitely showing signs of Munchausen syndrome, which is a psychological condition where someone pretends to be ill or makes themselves ill to get attention. So when she left high school at 16, she left with very little academic qualifications, but she became friends with a nurse from Grantham Hospital, and she loaned Beverly the necessary books and sort of helped her study and stuff so that she could start a course in nursing at college. So whilst on her pre-nursing course, Beverly worked part-time at a local pub called Fighting Cocks.
Fighting cocks? Yeah. Right.
When I think of a cock, I don't think of an animal.
No, that's a very strange name. But,
I think of a penis because in Britain, some people call penises cocks.
Yes.
So when I think of a fighting cock, I think of two penises fighting each other.
Oh my god.
Anyway, and she had a few boyfriends during the time that she worked there, and her nickname was the Fable. And that was because she kept making up stories about herself, which again is her looking for attention.
Right, okay.
So she met her boyfriend Steve Biggs while working at the Fighting Cocks. I can't say that without laughing.
Just say while working at the pub.
At the pub. And they were together for 2 years, and they even got engaged, but Steve said that Beverly was abusive. She would humiliate him, she would beat him up, she was aggressive and manipulative. She lived in a dorm at the college, but as soon as she moved in, odd things started to happen. She told the nurses that it was a poltergeist that had stuck a carving knife into a pillow, fed tablets to someone's dog, and set the bathroom curtains on fire.
Okay.
So, when they were getting asked about it, she's like, must have been a poltergeist.
Right, okay.
And at one point, the police were called to investigate a kitchen fire, and there was human poop in the fridge and under the cooker.
Lovely.
No, use the toilet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So she did manage to pass her nursing course barely, and after a few attempts, probably because she'd called in sick for 126 days out of her 2-year course.
Holy shit, that's...
That I counted that up, and I think I just sounded like 4 months, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Obviously not on the trot, but
yeah. Wow.
That's a lot of time to take out of a 2-year course.
It's definitely a lot.
She was always in the nurse's office, and they discovered that Beverly was causing most of her own symptoms. Like one time, she injected saline into one of her breasts to make it inflamed.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
So, because of her poor performance, no hospitals offered her a job. And she was the only member of her class not to be hired right after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
So she applied for a job at the Grantham and Kesteven hospital, and they had been reluctant to take her on. None of the adult wards would take her, but Ward 4, the paediatric ward, was so understaffed that they were like,
We're desperate.
we have to, we're desperate. So they agreed to hire her on a 6-month contract. And she'd only been there for 6 days when little Liam Taylor, the 7-week-old baby who died, was admitted. So 6 days. So, as you'll have figured out by now, Beverly was responsible for the incidents concerning the children that I've already told you about, but there were more.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm going to tell you the rest of them now.
Okay.
So 5-year-old Bradley Gibson had been admitted to Ward 4 with pneumonia. One night he complained that the drip was hurting him, and Beverly went to check on him, and while she was there he suddenly slumped forward and had a cardiac arrest. The resuscitation team took 32 minutes trying to save him. They had to shock him 7 or 8 times before finally managing to restart his heart. He was transferred to the Queen's Medical Centre, and he did survive, but he suffered permanent brain damage, due to the lack of oxygen to his brain. He lost control of his bladder and his legs, and had ongoing PTSD. 2-year-old Yik Hung Chan, who was known as Henry, was admitted to the ward after he'd had a fall and suffered a slight skull fracture. Whilst in hospital, he had 2 respiratory attacks. I'm just not going to even try. I'm just going to, if I don't say it right, everybody knows what I mean.
Yeah.
Before being transferred to Nottingham, and he recovered there. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a pattern, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Staff at the Grantham and Kesteven hospital were getting suspicious. What the hell was happening to all these children within a matter of weeks? Obviously something wasn't right. Mm-hmm. They did wonder if there was a new bug or something going about, some airborne thing that was going about. Mm-hmm. But they just didn't know. So Dr. Nana Yakara was still waiting for the results of Paul Crampton's blood tests, and more children were having severe attacks. On the 1st of April, Becky Phillips was admitted to the ward with gastroenteritis, which is inflammation of the stomach. Yeah. She was 9 weeks old, and her and her twin, Katie, had been born prematurely. So Beverly claimed that Becky appeared hypoglycemic and cold to the touch, but the test didn't find anything, so Becky was sent home. But during the night, Becky was convulsing and crying in pain, so her parents phoned the doctor, and he said, she's probably just got colic. So they did manage to soothe her, and they put her down, but unfortunately she died during the night. She did have an autopsy, but the pathologist couldn't find a cause of death, so it was put down to cot death.
Okay.
So Becky's twin, Katie, she was admitted to Ward 4 as a precaution, where, again, Beverly was the nurse on duty. Soon after she arrived, Katie stopped breathing and Beverly had to sound the alarm for the resuscitation team. They did manage to save her, but 2 days later she suffered a similar attack, which resulted in her lungs collapsing. So she was then transferred to Nottingham, and they found 5 of her ribs were broken, but the staff assumed that this was from the CPR, so no investigation was carried out. I mean, it could have been from that, but so there was no investigation. Katie survived, but she was left with severe brain damage, partial blindness, and partial
paralysis.
Paralysis, that's it, due to lack of oxygen. Her parents had been so grateful to Beverly for looking after Katie that they asked her to be her godmother.
What?
There was absolutely nothing wrong with Katie. She only got taken into hospital just so they could checked over as a precaution because her twin had died.
Wow.
And then she's ended up being paralysed, brain damage, blind. That's horrendous, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So Beverly was the centre of attention. She was regarded as an angel because she had been the one to get Katie seen so quickly. Mm-hmm. And because miraculously she was always the first to the scene, giving parents the impression that she was always going the extra mile.
Mm-hmm. Right, she just wanted to be centre of attention.
So 6-year-old Michael Davison was admitted to the ward a few days later to recover after an operation. He'd had an air rifle pellet removed from his lung. So he was doing well until Beverly administered his regular antibiotic injection. He had a seizure and stopped breathing, but thankfully the other doctors on the ward stabilised him and he made a full recovery. Mm-hmm. So eventually Paul Crampton, the little boy at the start, remember, his blood test came back from Cardiff and it was discovered that there were 500 milliunits per litre of insulin in his blood, which is very unusual because in a child it should be in the region of 10 to 15 milliunits per litre.
Wow.
So it should have been 10 to 15, but it was 500.
That's a lot.
But as Paul had recovered so quickly, they concluded that it was like a rogue sample or that he had suffered from an insulinoma, which is a malfunction of the pancreas, which had now righted itself. Mm-hmm. So no action was taken with regards to that.
Right, okay.
Because he was fine now, you know. Yeah. So Mary Pete, the nurse that I mentioned earlier, she said, quote, "I didn't think that there was anything happening that was caused by a person. It's unthinkable that somebody who is looking after sick children would hurt them. It was unthinkable then, it's unthinkable now," end quote. Totally. But it was happening. Mm-hmm. So on the 22nd of April 1991, 15-month-old Claire Peck was admitted to the ward for asthma treatment and she needed a breathing tube. The doctor popped out of the room to talk to her parents and left Beverly in the room with Claire. Minutes later, Claire went into respiratory failure. She was resuscitated and put onto a ventilator. Once she was stabilised and doing okay, the doctor stepped out again to speak to the parents, leaving her in Beverly's care, and within minutes Claire had another attack, and unfortunately this time she died.
Well, I mean, I guess that didn't send, I don't know what the word is, but like warning signs that something was going on every time the doctor stepped out of the room and it was just left with the nurse.
Yeah. I mean, it seems obvious to us.
I suppose so, now that we actually know that she was the cause of it. I suppose at that time maybe it wasn't so obvious, I guess.
I mean, I know all these things have happened, but as you know, the nurse had said, like, they didn't, because you wouldn't automatically jump to the conclusion that somebody was doing this to these children, because people who work in a hospital, they're there to care for people, not to damage them, you know.
Harm them, yeah.
So an autopsy showed that Claire had died from natural causes, but a consultant at the hospital, Dr. Nelson Porter, he initiated an inquiry because he was alarmed at the amount of cardiac arrests over the last couple of months on the children's ward. Initially, an airborne virus was suspected, but obviously nothing was found. Yeah. So Kaylee Asher was admitted to the ward, but I'm not sure why. I don't know what was wrong with Kaylee. But she was 13 months old, but she had 2 heart attacks while I was there, and she was left permanently brain damaged. And actually saw a clip on YouTube that she was on telly with her mum and dad, being interviewed by Piers Morgan and somebody else, some woman. Mm-hmm. Everybody in the UK probably knows who she is, but I don't.
Is Anna Reid?
Don't know. But she's been interviewed, and Kaylee, although she's I don't know how old. I don't know how old she would have been at that time of the interview, because I don't know how old the thing was, but she was probably, what, in her 20s or something. And still every night she looks under her bed, like behind the cushions, like, because she's scared that Nurse Alec is coming to get her.
Wow.
Even though at the time she was only 13 months old, so I'm not sure she wouldn't have even remembered.
But now that she knows what's happened.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said, like, she's, you know, she was left permanently brain damaged. She's obviously has to be looked after by her parents.
Yeah.
And the sad thing about it is that she can't claim any benefits, because she got a payout.
Right.
From the case. She did get a payout, but I'm assuming it wasn't that much to actually, you know, for to live on for the rest of her life. So, like, but she's not. So she has to spend that money before she can get benefits, which is shit, because she deserves to get benefits, because she's
exactly.
and
she deserved to get compensation for clearly what happened to her.
Yeah. So on the 30th of April 1991, the hospital administrators went to the police and an investigation began. So on the 3rd of May, there was a meeting, and it was attended by a variety of people, including Detective Superintendent Stuart Clifton, the 2 consultant paediatricians, Dr. Nana Yakara and Dr. Porter, and Professor David Hull. So David Hull was asked to produce an independent report based on just the medical notes of 14 cases. He concluded that only 3 signalled any worry, and only one of these, Paul Crampton, seriously concerned him, with the notes showing evidence of an untoward act. Because remember, all these deaths have been put down to natural causes, epilepsy, whatever else. So it didn't look like there really was anything.
No.
So D.S. Clifton said that in some police circles there was a suggestion that they were just wasting money and they should just pull the plug on it. But he chose to keep on investigating the circumstances surrounding the collapses of Paul Crampton, because he was the one that was flagging up suspicions. So the police started interviewing staff at the hospital, and officers said it was clear that the nurses didn't know themselves what was going on, and they, as well as the parents, just wanted answers. And everyone was just hoping that these cardiac arrests were going to have been like a natural cause. Of course, the officers interviewed Beverly Alec, as she appeared to have been present at like all these incidents. So one of the officers said that when she met Beverly, she seemed pleasant and quiet. She answered all the questions put to her, and she acted no different to any of the other nurses that had been spoken to. Of course, what they didn't know then was that Beverly had spent her whole life lying. So this interview was no different, and nobody suspected her for now. So D.C. Clifton ordered the
exhumation
of Claire Peck, and tests showed high levels of potassium and the presence of lignocaine, which is a drug that's used to treat cardiac arrests in adults, and it's never used on children, so that should not have been in her system.
Right, okay.
Meanwhile, outside of the hospital, Detective Neil Jones was given the task of looking for any other evidence around the 13 children. So he went to the Queen's Medical Centre, and they sent him to the City Hospital in Nottingham. And he found a big freezer over there that contained blood samples. So these samples were taken for children to check for like genetic defects, growth analysis, that sort of thing. And they were supposed to be destroyed every 3 to 6 months. But it hadn't been done for a while. Somebody was obviously not doing their job, which was a good thing, because the police got into the freezer and they recovered 9 blood samples out of the 13 children that they were investigating. So it was actually a good thing that somebody hadn't been doing their job. So the samples were sent off to Professor Vincent Marks at the University of Surrey, and among them was a sample of Paul Crampton's, which was tested for a second time. Now remember, the blood insulin level of Paul was 500. It wasn't. It was actually 47,000.
What?
Which is the second highest ever recorded in the world.
Holy shit.
So, of course, they started looking into why there would be such a discrepancy between the results from Cardiff and the results from Surrey. And they discovered that the machine on which the blood had been tested at Cardiff, that was the one that was the 500, that was only calibrated to 500, and it had gone off the scale. So basically, they had just recorded the result as the highest that their machine would go, which was 500, but it was actually 47,000. So now knowing the actual results, it was concluded that it was injected insulin. So here for the first time was some evidence that suggested there was a killer on Ward 4.
Yeah.
So there was a medical report prior to 1991 about 2 cases where babies were given insulin and various other drugs, and that was by a mother, and that was termed Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So we've talked about this in one of our older Patreon episodes, but for anyone who hasn't listened to that, or you're like me and Laura and can't remember shit, I just thought I'd quickly...
your memory.
Yeah, so this is when a person creates false symptoms in someone else. Someone they're looking after, like their child, for example. So a mother who's creating false symptoms in their child could be doing things like putting feces into their baby's milk to give the child a fever, or like putting glucose in urine samples to suggest that the child has diabetes, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's what they were thinking they were looking at here. So police began to look at where the insulin may have came from, and it was discovered that insulin was replaced on the ward from the hospital pharmacy on demand. It was kept on the ward in locked fridges, and one key fitted any fridge within the hospital.
Right.
So the key to the fridge on Ward 4 had gone missing, and the last person known to have it...
Beverly Allen.
Yeah. So she'd been asked about it, but she claimed that she'd used it, but she'd passed it on to another nurse. So Professor Marks tested all the blood samples of the children, and it turned out that it wasn't only Paul's blood. It turned out It turned out that it wasn't only Paul's blood. I've totally written that wrong. Anyway, it wasn't only his that had the abnormalities. That's not what I've read. I'm not going to tell you what I've read. So Becky Phillips' blood came back with about 9,000 units of insulin, and other samples like Claire Peck's had potassium and various other drugs in the samples. So this was now a clear indicator that someone was intentionally doing this to the children. After making charts and timelines to see who had been looking after the children when the arrests happened, they saw that each and every time Beverly Allett had been left alone with the child in question when they collapsed. So Beverly, she had convinced everyone who knew her at the hospital that she was kind and caring. So when fingers were being pointed at her, a lot of her colleagues actually thought she was being framed.
Really?
They couldn't believe that she'd be capable of hurting a child.
I guess you wouldn't in the first instance, would you? You wouldn't think that anybody that's in that position would abuse their position to harm anybody.
I know, but like the fact that they thought she was being framed was the fact that they're like, well, they believe that somebody's doing this.
But
it couldn't be her. So she must have came across so kind and caring that they were maybe thinking it's somebody else who didn't do it, you know.
Maybe.
So on the 21st of May 1991 at 7 a.m, the police arrested Beverly at her home on suspicion of stealing the key from the insulin fridge and for the attempted murder of Paul Crampton. So one of the officers said that at no time did she lose her cool or give the impression that she was anxious. She was pretty much relaxed and just taking it in her stride. She was taken to the police station for questioning, and officers searched her house. They found a syringe and the ward allocation book in her bedroom. So police spent hours interviewing Beverly, and she didn't admit any single offence. But she tried to put other people in the frame for like each child, you know, well, so-and-so was there, so it could be them that did it to that child, it could, you know.
Yeah.
So officers thought that in her own mind, she was convinced that there would be insufficient evidence to convict her, so that's why she was so calm. And they did struggle to gather enough evidence to convict her, and she was released pending further investigation, and she was suspended from duty. So some of the children's parents were so sure of Beverly's innocence that they actually hired a private investigator to investigate the police.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
So-
I did wonder, I don't know whether you'll cover it or not, but just thinking out loud, I'll think about it, is that I wonder if they were taking note of the period of time she was suspended from her job. Like, was there any instances going on in the ward that were similar to what had been experienced when she was there?
Well, no, because it was her that was doing
Well, no,
it.
but I wonder if they were taking notice of that.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't know. We'll find out when we get there.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how much of a convincing liar that she was. People actually thought that the police were trying to stitch up Beverly. So she must have been bloody convincing.
She must have been.
So now out of work, Beverly had to move in with a friend, Tracy Jobson, and her family in Peterborough. And funnily enough, after Beverly left the hospital, the attack stopped. There you go. Don't know they would have noticed, wouldn't they? But
so.
Things started happening in Tracy's house. So bleach was found in Tracy's brother's bed. Tablets were given to the dog, and he was rolling around on the ground, frothing at the mouth. Tracy's mum was becoming increasingly concerned and asked Tracy, her brother, and Beverly, like, what the hell is going on?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's doing these things? And they all three of them denied it. And Beverly then came up with the fact that she had seen a poltergeist, so that must be responsible for the strange things happening.
Right.
So one day they went shopping to a local market, and Tracy's brother said he didn't feel well, and he then collapsed and was rushed to Peterborough Hospital, and it was later concluded that he had had a hypoglycemic attack. Beverly had made him a drink before they left the house. It was blackcurrant juice, and he had said it tasted funny when he was drinking it, but I think he just drank it anyway,
Yeah.
I'm thirsty.
Yeah.
So Tracy's mum called the police, and Beverly was once again taken into custody. So by November 1991, the police were in a position to charge Beverly, and she was charged with 13 counts, 4 of murder, 8 of attempted murder, and 1 of grievous bodily harm. And she just didn't say bother arse. She went to her cell, had a meal, went straight to sleep, and she slept right through the night and had to be woken the following morning for court, which to me is like, how the hell can you sleep when you've just been charged with all that? And you know, like
you think you'd have a sleepless night.
Yeah, but nah, she went to sleep. Nobody had to go and wake her up to go to court in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So over the next 15 months, Beverly was held at Wakefield Prison awaiting trial. And on the 15th of February 1993, the trial of the Crown versus Beverly Gale Allett began. By the time she got to trial, she had lost loads of weight. And a lot of the time she didn't appear at court because she was claiming that she was ill.
Mm-hmm.
She pled not guilty, but she was found guilty of all charges. So she was convicted of 13 counts, 4 of murder and 9 of attempted murder, and she was given 13 life sentences. After 1 week in prison, she refused to eat or drink and was moved to Rampton Secure Hospital, and it was concluded that she was mentally ill and shouldn't be in prison. So that's where she's been. She's been in a secure hospital.
Right.
So on the 6th of December 2007, Justice Stanley Burton confirmed that Beverly must serve the original minimum sentence of 30 years, as some of the victims' families actually thought the minimum was 40 years, but it wasn't. Right. It was 30 years. Mm-hmm. So her minimum tariff expired in November 2021, and she is now eligible for release on parole.
Oh, so was the life sentences running all concurrently with each other?
Well, yeah, 13. It was just like, well, I think it was like 13 life sentences with a minimum of 30 years. Yeah. So she's obviously served 30 years.
Yeah.
And now she's eligible for parole. But that doesn't mean that she's going to get released.
No, that's right, yeah.
But she is eligible for it. So, no, she should be in prison for the rest of her life.
Definitely. I'm sorry, but I mean, I think there's obviously definitely an element of she was mentally probably ill.
Well, I think that Munchausen's by proxy is probably a good shout because she was making other people ill.
Yeah. So I think she obviously was a case of that, but it doesn't excuse like what she did to those poor children and a couple of adults as well, clearly. So, you know, she deserves to be locked up for the rest of her life.
Well, she should be, yeah. So, but can you imagine that she could be out on the streets sometime in the near future?
I know, it's horrible.
I know. So that was an awful, horrible one, as usual.
As usual.
But thanks to everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
If you would like to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, we are crime_divers_pod. We are on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, and it's Crime Divers Podcast. Our email is crime_divers_pod@outlook.com. Our website is crimedivers.co.uk. If you would like to join our Patreon, it's patreon.com/crimedivers. And if you would like to buy us a coffee, it's buymeacoffee.com/crimedivers.
And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, review.